Right, so today I've been working on this, the Vectra GSI. Fixed a power steering leak which turned out to be a union, which sits right at the back of the engine bay at the bottom, accessible underneath on the ramp. It was just loose because somebody had taken it off before and damaged the delicate alloy washer, so we're replacing with two copper washers, like a banjo union type fitting, and replaced it, the fluid, with some fresh power steering fluid. And it's got another problem, it's got a water leak on it, so I've got a pressure tester on the header tank which goes on there. Pump it up and you just read the gauge and see if it loses fluid pressure, and it has done, and it's dripping down the right hand side of the engine, dripping off the sump, and I'm hoping that could only be the water pump which sits just right there, you can see on camera. So that's a job I'm going to be tackling tomorrow, which will involve taking off this induction pipe, bottom half of the airbox, and then its auxiliary belt, detension it, and there's three 10mm bolts hold the pulley wheel to the pump. I think there's 2 or 3 bolts hold it to the block. The rubber seal, if I remember, but it's a long time since I've done one of these. So it's the end of the day for a moment, so it's a job for tomorrow. But yeah, there'll be a video on how to do a water pump on a 2.5 V6. Right, let's continue doing this water pump. First of all, the induction pipe has to come off, gain access. Mark on this purge valve bit of Tipp-Ex, because there's 2 pipes on it. I want to make sure they go in the right direction, so I know that one goes there when I come to refit it. This car's 24 years old, so when you're handling rubber pipe work and stuff like that, it can become quite fragile and split, so you've got to be careful when you're prying at stuff. Same goes for plastics as well. End up splitting them sometimes. There we go, it's come off alright. So the back end of this induction pipe is actually split there, so we're going to have to do a repair on that before it goes back on. Right, so the airbox should be released. I've got to use 10mm socket or ratchet spanner of some kind to release the airbox from down there. The access on the 2.5s is quite tight because it's a big engine with a lot of stuff stuck to it, ancillaries and what have you. So you've got to be patient to get your hands into areas where there's really not very good access. struggling here, I really am. It's a 10mm nut, which is right down there. Can't even see it, it's so hidden. Can't even get it on the camera. All that does is hold the airbox on, lower half. I have to be inventive. What tools I'm using? Probably a 1/4" ratchet with an extension of some kind, a 10mm socket on it. I do have a ratchet spanner with a flexible head on it, and these are quite useful for getting into tight areas where you can't fit ratchets. This car has air conditioning, so you've got the air conditioning pipes which run right along where I need to get to. God, I'm struggling here. Come on. These V6s can be one of the trickiest to work on. Right, that's good. I managed to loosen the 10mm nut, which I can see with my eyes, but I can't see with the camera. There it is. That one right down there. Just about see it. So I loosened it with a spanner and I'm just pushed it around with the pry bar just to get it moving. I can do the rest of my fingers. There we go, that's released. Right, and the other one. Oh, it's tight. It's positioned. Where's that one now? Right at the front down there. Right underneath these pipes. Barely see it. So what I might have to do is release this piece of plastic here. Then I can get a socket into it. So that's a screwdriver in there, half a turn, and that's released now. There we go. And just see, where is that one? Right there. Look how tight the access is. Very tricky to do for such a simple thing. Let's just releasing an airbox. Got that slim torch down there. That's it falling. There we go. Right. Not the nicest of camera angles. It's all I can manage at the moment so far, unfortunately. Okay. Okay, that's loosened off. Push it around again with a pry bar, hopefully get it moving a little bit. There we go. There you go, that just lifts out. So the 10mm is that one there, one at the back, and that just fits into these slots here. One there, and one there. So there's the water pump, which is very crusty looking. That's just the pulley wheel though, you don't get that with a new pump. And that appears to be held on with three 10mm bolts, M6 thread. So before we release the auxiliary belt, or the alternator belt, whichever you want to call it, it's best to just crack these off first, because you'll end up with the pulley wheel just spinning, because there's no pressure from the belt holding it, you see. So if you crack them off now, loosen them, and then when you release the belt, then you can just wind them off with your fingers and take the pulley wheel off by hand, and it's pretty simple that way. Let's see if we can just get that to stay there. Put a little bit of WD-40 on it. They've run out this one. Yeah, just enough on there. And that'll just soak in a little bit and hopefully help release it when I've got to crack them off. So for this, I'm going to be using a 3/8 extension bar with a 10mm socket on it. Single hex. If you use a multi-hex head on something as rusty as that, you've got the risk of it rounding off if they're being stubborn. So if you use a single hex, then there's less chance of it rounding off. Otherwise you're into like major labour trying to chisel off a rounded off bolt, especially into a pulley wheel like that with very little access. First one, released okay. Second one, can the socket just fits between the chassis leg and the pulley wheel, only just. Come on. There we go. Second one released. And there's only 3 on this. So that's the third one released. I'll just make sure those are finger loose, which they are. There goes one. I'll take one all the way out because you've got the other two holding it in still, so it's not going to fall off or anything. One bolt. I'll just put these up on a scuttle panel of this because they make a good shelf. You can store your bolt saw fasteners up near the windscreen. There's the second one. And the third one is going to be tight because even though they're all loosened, because I've taken two out, the last one is taking all the stress of the belt pushing on it, so it is going to be tight until you release the belt, but then it'll be finger tight when that's released. So it's time to release the belt now. Right, so on a V6, the tensioner wheel, so hard to film it in access, is, that's the alternator. The tensioner wheel is that one there. 15mm nut on it. What you do is you put the 3/8 extension bar on it with a 15mm socket, I think it is. You pull it towards you, detensions the spring, you can just flip the belt off just so you can take the pulley wheel off. And I'll attempt to do that now. Hopefully been able to film it as well. I'm attempting to film this in one shot because it's not a massive job to do this. It's a long time since I've done one, but as I recall they weren't a huge job to undertake, so I shouldn't have to cut it too much. Just wish I could get you guys to see it a bit better. Right, I'll place the camera down a second, I'll get a socket. Take the 10mm off there, put the 15 on it. Right, as I pull that, it's moving and it's deactivating the spring for the tensioner, so the belt is effectively not under tension anymore. I'm going to hold it with one hand and do it with the other to release the belt, so it's a two-handed job. Top the belt off, the water pump just slides off, there we go. That's off there now, and then carefully, gently release it back, don't let it flick back, otherwise you end up losing a knuckle. Right, so that second bolt is there. And the last one is here, so see, it's gone loose now because there's no pressure from the belt pushing on it. There we go. Pulley wheel thankfully isn't seized onto the centre section, and it should just slide up out of the way. Maybe that's out of the way now. Pretty crusty in there, but so the alternator belt didn't squeak or anything, so I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to leave it as it is. Place that up there, and down in there, I have the water pump. So alloy housing, pulley wheel sits on there, it's just driven by the auxiliary belt, so it's separate to the timing belt. You can see the timing belt in there if you look, but it's nothing to do with the timing belt. So I'm hoping I can gain access to the 3 bolts that hold it in place without having to take off all this plastic cover and everything, because that's a massive job to do all that. Because it's just like doing a timing belt really. So in there we have some E-Torx bolts. Which are, just see one there, is actually stuck in there, I've just noticed. A piece of rubbish, which is a cigarette filter wrapper, which has probably been blown in from the road or something and got dragged up in there. So it's quite important to keep covers over the timing belts and stuff like that, because that's just a piece of like loose plastic, but if a pebble or something else got thrown up off the road and got jammed in the timing belt, it would throw the timing belt off obviously, and then you end up with a wrecked engine. So just worth keeping note of anything you do find in there. Right, I'm just going to pause the film now and get some tools for that. Okay, I've just been and got a small 3/8 extension with a E12 socket on it. And luckily that just fits in to get the fixing bolts in there. And we bought this car in 2021 and the previous owner had a timing belt done on it not long before, and I've just noticed that there is a bit of broken plastic there. You can see that irregular shape and that split in it, so whoever's done the timing belt previously has damaged that. So it's not great, but it's not detrimental to anything, but it's just something to note. So with that in place now, I can have a go at getting those bolts undone and seeing if the pump will clear this plastic housing, which I'm hoping it does. Right, I've got the camera position there. I'm afraid because access is so tight on this, that's the best view you can get of it, so I shall proceed in undoing the bolts. I've got some ratchets and they're like a slimline head on them. Really shallow, and they're absolutely ideal for getting into tight areas like this. One released. Hoping I can do it in my hand the rest of the way. Oh, almighty, that is tight. I did a water pump on my old Saab 900 and that literally took about 15 minutes to do. And it's held on with more bolts than this, and it has 2 belts running onto it. But they're just like a really, you know, for doing stuff like that, they're really well designed. It's like a lot of these newer, slightly newer vehicles, I say newer, but obviously newer than the 900. The ease of working on stuff like this is a lot less, you know, it's harder to do. One bolt, that's a M10 threaded bolt. It's quite a chunky bolt, that. It's so inaccessible down here. It's very tight. God. I think that's locked on there. Right. Second one. So there's only 3 on this. Which sounds simple, but it's getting access to them is quite tricky. Come on, there we go. Right, that's released. I can see it, I can't get to it. Right, it's the second one. Another good tool to use is a magnet tool. This is a pretty chunky one, so if you loosen the bolt and you can't get to it, but it's free, you can put a magnet on it and it'll grab it. And you can pick it out by doing that, like that basically. So there's less risk of you dropping it down into the bowels of the engine. Right, there's one more bolt, which is at the front there, which you can actually see. Again, access is quite tight on this. Oh, God, that was tight. There we go. Release that. So there's a few turns and it's finger loose then. So that's coming out. And what I'm going to do is now, so I'm at the point of nearly releasing the pump, so I put a drain tray or two underneath the car to catch the antifreeze, or attempt to, should I say. You know, it's like, I'm going to do my best to catch it. It's already started dripping there. So when it does release, hopefully most of it will go into the tray. I just tied it up afterwards, rather than having to mop the floor, which isn't the best floor to mop on here because the concrete's quite rough. So that bolt just needs finishing off, winding out. Find that socket. There we go, all the water's coming out now. All running out, all antifreeze. So push the pump up against the block again, wind this last bolt out with my finger, and now it's crunch time, whether we can actually remove it from the engine without having to take all this plastic off around it, I don't know, so I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. Last bolt out, punch release, oh, and a massive deluge of water just released then. Oh god, and another one. These engines, they're a V6, obviously they're quite a chunky engine block. You've got two heads and two sets of cylinders and everything. I think they're what you call an open deck, so the water runs around the cylinders rather than being closed, so they hold quite a bit of coolant, these, compared to a lot of closed deck engines. Right, let's inspect this pump. So there is the item. On your first inspection, I'd say that's been replaced probably when the belt was done. I can't see any obvious leaks, but it was definitely leaking from there. So the other thing is, the other culprit could be that in there there's a rubber seal which presses against the engine block. Either that hasn't been put in properly, or the block wasn't cleaned up properly before it's put on. And that's maybe what was leaking, because there's definitely coolant running down there at quite a rate. Okay, so this is the new water pump. And it's got a brass impeller on this, which is not a bad thing. It means it's not going to corrode or anything, like a steel one would. And like the horrible plastic ones, which sometimes the centre there gets split on the impeller, and they end up losing traction with the spindle, and they end up not spinning round, the plastic ones, end up kind of overheating. So inspecting the O-ring, this one appears to be quite flat. The camera won't focus on that, but it's quite flat, and the new one is a perfectly round. So I'd say, I think the pump is okay, but the old pump, but I think the O-ring's probably just gone a bit squished over time, and I think it started leaking out of there when it gets hot. So you're not supposed to use sealant or anything on these. You're supposed to be able to just push it into the groove, then offer the pump up to the engine block. That one keeps popping out. Anyway, so that's for the bin, this O-ring, this old one. So I'm using a Graph water pump. You've been using these for like donkey's years. We've used them on loads of different makes of cars, including Saabs. He's a Saab specialist. Part of the Natelli group, and I think they do water pumps as well, obviously, and stuff like that. And we've never had any issues with them, so I have no issue with using one on my own vehicle. The one that's come off it is an FAI item. It's got a steel impeller, which I don't think is as good as a brass impeller. So I just think it's not as superior as the other one. I think the Graph's a better one, so I'm going to run with that anyway. I say we've had no issues with these. Before I go ahead and fit this water pump, I'm going to just make doubly sure that inside there, where the O-ring presses against the engine block, is free of any corrosion and debris and stuff like that. Because if you put it back on and it's not cleaned up in there, it's just a complete waste of time, because it'll just end up leaking again when it gets up to temperature. So I'm going to just give it a wipe down with a cloth and some brake cleaner, the universal cleaner, and inspect it, and then if all's good, just offer the pump up, make sure the O-ring doesn't fall out of place, and then start buttoning it up again. Right, I know I mentioned about a rubber O-ring, you're not supposed to use sealant on them because you're not supposed to need it, but on this one, this O-ring is supposed to just sit nicely in that groove and stay there, but it just keeps popping out. And when I'm offering this up to the engine block, if that slides out of place and I bolt it up and it ends up getting nicked or not seating properly, it'll end up leaking. So just to hold it in place, I'm going to use a bit of high quality silicone. It dries quite firm, like rubber. It's not like cheap stuff, it's not bathroom sealant. Just run a bit of that just in this groove. Doesn't have to be loads, just enough to hold it. Smooth it down so it's relatively even. It's hard to get it in there because the end is not allowing me to squirt it in with a finer nozzle. I'm just pasting in my finger. It doesn't look very professional, but trust me, it's fine. Not like the car that came in today that had £1,200 of the welding on it, and someone had used what looked like caulking that you use in your house to seam sealer it. So I don't know, I don't think the guy was aware of that. I didn't tell him, I just, it's his car, it's his issue. Right, so there we go. Just a thin smear of that on there. Make sure the seal is pushed right into the groove tightly. Run it around with your finger. Give it an inspection sideways, make sure it's all level and in there. And that's all you basically need, so that's all you need. You don't need loads of it, it's just to hold it in basically. And then just push that against the block and then bolt it in. Okay, apologies for the dodgy camera angle, but this is the best I can get it due to like really tight access. I'll get the camera to stay still. Okay, so I'm ready to hold it in. I think it goes in this way, but I'm not 100% sure. So let's give it a go. Oh my god, it's tight enough. So there's a new pump going in. Come on, let's get it to line up. There's something, at least one bolt hole would be helpful to line up with. Yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned it, but the face of the block looked completely fine. I wiped it with brake cleaning solvent and a clean rag, and there didn't seem to be any pitting or anything on the block. If there was, I would have put like a big smear of silicone on the seal, but it didn't need it because there wasn't any corrosion on it. So I'm just going to try and get in position now and line these holes up. I might have to use an inspection mirror for this because I can't look directly into the holes. are not lined up, so I'll have to manoeuvre it until they do line up. There's one there. One there. Right, okay. So I do have the holes lined up, I'm pretty sure. So I'll attempt to bolt in. I feel it starting. I just need to get it in a couple of turns on the thread, and I know it's ready to start tightening up. So get a socket with extension on it. Place it onto the bolts. Again, very tight access in here, very limited. Oh god. It doesn't want to start on there, unfortunately. Oh god. Tell you what, give me a Saab to work on any day. Right, I'm going to attempt to cheat here. So this is a 10mm 1/4 inch drive socket, and it's just about the right size to loosely fit on top of this E12 bolt, just to get it started. It's easier access with it. Couple of threads turned on that, so I should try to get the other two in. Also, if you're not used to doing stuff like this, it's just good to note that if you have like 3 or 4 positions to fix something in like this, is to get all the bolts in loose and then tighten them sequentially, rather than doing one up really tight and then the other one up really tight, whereas you end up misaligning things, stripping threads, or damaging the item you're trying to replace. Okay, the second one's gone in a lot easier. A good few turns on this. Oh, that's 2 in, 2 out of the 3. I may have to use the magnet tool on this last one just to get it started. If we just piece it in there, so get it on the magnet tool like that, at a 90-degree angle near enough, feed it into the hole, there is still very tight access. So what I'm going to use a small magnet tool. This tiny little one. good this is tight. Like this. Okay, I've got it just dangling in the hole, but I've not started it on the thread yet, so it's just dangling. Let's see if that drops down. It's into the timing gear, and I do not want that. Just to mess around taking plastic covers off and stuff. Trying to get this feeling back in position. This has got to be one of the least favourite engines for me to work on. It really is a nuisance. Right, I'm just going to pause it here. I'm going to continue this because I'm sure nobody needs to see me winding bolts in. Okay, just as I've come to put this pulley back on, as I've been winding the bolts in by hand, I've realised that when they're fully wound in, they're actually catching the water pump. So I can only presume if the bolts are too long, they've either been replaced at some point, or obviously the new pump is a slightly different design, where the webbing is for the alloy part of the pump. So I'm going to have to either put some washers on these or find some slightly shorter bolts for them, because it isn't ideal. Now, I've come to a possible conclusion and a theory. Right, this is the original bolt, or the bolt that I took out of the water pump. And these are three that I've had in my toolbox, which I've got from salvage Vauxhalls. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think the original ones may have been shorter like this. And that's why these longer ones are actually catching. Because virtually everything in the engine bay of a Vauxhall of this era is these little E bolts. Like everywhere you look, there's like E bolts holding everything on, and there's very, very few 10 mils. So I'm going to try running with these, and if they don't catch, then they'll be ideal because the same thread and everything, and same quality of steel. Okay, I've just wound those in, and the pump appears to spin perfectly fine. And they wind in a good, 10 to 12 mil, so they've got plenty of purchase on the pulley wheel that it bolts to, so they're not going to come loose anytime soon. Right, the underside's all cleared off now. This is completely covered in oil and antifreeze. All the sump and the power steering pipes there and everything, all completely coated, so it's free of any obvious dirt and leaks. So when we come to fill it up with fresh coolant, should be able to see if there's any new leaks on there, but hopefully not. Right, time to fill it up. I'm using a funnel because I don't want to make a mess of all the plastics and stuff, because it'll take ages to clean off. Right, the coolant bottles in the V6s I've found, after owning one for 10 years, they always end up getting gunked up, even if you flush the system and put the right antifreeze in and everything. I've put 3 new header tanks on mine, and they always end up getting cracked up after a couple of thousand miles, end up going murky again. So I just gave up trying to clean mine, but I've got this nice cover off an early Saab 9.5 fit to this one, where they only did for like 18 months and then stopped doing them, and apparently they're quite sought after. It just tidies the engine bay up a bit. So I've got a mixture of around 50-50 pink antifreeze, which I believe is a 5-year stuff, which is better than the blue stuff. Should prevent corrosion to air gaskets and, you know, other stuff like the radiator core, and oil cooler, which sits under the middle of the plenums in the V of the engine, and a bit of a solder change. And this one's had it done previously by the previous owner with an uprated stainless steel one, because the original ones are alloy and then rotting out and leaking coolant into the oil. Carry on with this. Right, okay. Oh well, I've overfilled that a bit. I can always syringe a bit out afterwards. Right, that's the correct level. Okay, back to this split induction pipe. Pretty simple fix at this. I'm going to put super glue on the mating faces of that. It's been cleaned with solvent, and then in between, after that's been super glued, I'm going to get this thin section of soft rubber headlamp washer hose off an old Saab and put that in there, and then that shall seal any air leaks and hold it together stronger than it was before, because it's not under any pressure, it's just sucking in on itself. When it inducts there, it compresses, so if anything it will make it better than it ever was. So that's that solution to that issue. Right, we're going to start it for the first time after doing the water pump. Coolant stopped up and the induction pipe is repaired. There is antifreeze which has fallen on the timing belt and the auxiliary belt, so it may screech a bit until it dries off, but it shouldn't be an issue. The cooling system on these are self-bleeding, as I'm aware of virtually every Vauxhall apart from the Renault based vans, because the header tank sits higher up than anywhere else on the cooling system, so any air that's in the system will work its way to the top there. So we'll just run it and we'll check it underneath the leaks, but I'm pretty sure everything should be good.